A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
I've always tried to be a good parent, or at least, that's what I tell myself when the guilt creeps in, especially after the argument with my son, Noah, last weekend. It started innocently enough. We were hosting a family barbecue, the kind that used to be full of laughter and joy, but things changed when his cousin, Mia, came over. Mia, with her bright smile, effortless charm, and an ease with people that Noah has never quite managed to grasp, was a whirlwind of energy as she sauntered into our yard after a long drive from the city. Noah, my 10-year-old introvert, sat rigidly at the corner of our deck, poking at his plate of burgers like they had personally offended him. When Mia launched herself at her younger sister, Chloe, squealing with delight and engaging her with an uninhibited joy that only kids should possess, I couldn't help but notice Noah's sulking expression grow darker. The longer he watched Mia laugh and play, the more withdrawn he became. It was as if every giggle was a dagger buried deeper into his heart, and the way my daughter fawned over Mia cut like shards of broken glass. I couldn't ignore it. When the barbecue came to a close, and I noticed Mia stuffing her face with cake while Noah stared blankly into his soda, I felt a pang of frustration bubbling up within me, a vile mix of heartbreak and anger that begged to be unleashed. So, I did what I shouldn't have. I confronted him. "You know, it's your fault she's happier to see Mia than she is to see you," I blurted out, the words laced with a sting I instantly regretted. Noah's face fell, his eyes wide with a combination of hurt and confusion, like a kid who'd just been told there's no Santa. He looked at me with a depth of sadness I had never seen before, and in that moment, I realized I had crossed a line, but it was too late to take it back. I watched him wilt under the weight of my words, and my heart twisted painfully as I heard Mia exclaim how much she missed Chloe, how they should have playdates all summer long, as Noah quietly snuck away from the group, headed inside like a ghost. The rest of the day was a haze. Laughter echoed outside while I stared at my untouched food as guilt coiled around my insides. It felt like the summer buzz had died with my son's spirit, and I couldn't bear to face the implications of what I had done. I watched Noah pace the floor of our living room, his brows knitted in concentration as if he were solving an unsolvable puzzle. I knew I'd hurt him but couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, my harsh words were a push he needed to confront his own struggles with social interactions. Parenting is a turbulent sea. Sometimes, you have to risk capsizing in order to teach your child how to swim. But that little thought didn't diminish the weight pressing down on me, a hand squeezing painfully around my heart while I tried justifying my big mouth. I spent the night tossing and turning, his shocked face replaying in my mind, a haunting echo of regret that morphed into nightmares filled with shadows whispering secrets of my failures. By morning, I decided I needed to talk to him, get his side of the story, and construct a bridge over this chasm I had opened with careless words. I found him in his room, so small and fragile in the dim, gray sunlight filtering through his window. When I sat beside him, he looked up, eyes stormy with a mixture of sorrow and anger. I wanted to reach out and pull him into my embrace, but something kept me rooted in place, the ghost of my previous words acting as a barrier. "Mom, why did you say that?" he asked, his voice steady but breaking at the edges. I fumbled for the right words but found none. "I didn't mean, I just wanted you to see." But stopped, trailing off, feeling the futility of my attempts. "Are you mad at me?" he said, and that broke me. I felt the hot rush of tears stinging my eyes as I wrestled with an instinct to just sweep him up and yell at him to express himself, let anger out into the ether rather than bottle it up like he always does. Noah was my delicate boy, always so kind but often mocked at school for being too soft. How could I say anything, be anything, when all I wanted was to shelter him from the world? "You're not to blame for anything, Mia is just more outgoing, and it shouldn't matter," I replied weakly, desperately clawing for some reassurance in my own voice while he stared at me, waiting for real honesty. I wanted to tell him that I was scared of his loneliness, scared that he wouldn't fit into the world the way I hoped for him, that every snide remark from his peers killed a piece of my heart. "You know what, Mom? I just want to be me," came those fragile words, breaking through the air, and in that moment, I realized how wrong I had been. As he turned away and stared out the window, I was reminded of crisp autumn days, golden leaves spiraling silently to the earth, and suddenly I felt the weight of my own expectations crashing down like thunder. I'd wanted my son to be someone he's not. The thought lingered long after he left to find solace in his video games, an echo of realization that resonated deep within me. It wasn't Noah who needed to change, it was me that needed to stop placing blame and start nurturing the incredible person he was destined to become. I knew I had to repair the rift I had caused, but how? Days passed, and I crafted a plan, an emotional lifeline, something to counter the agony of that summer gathering. I realized that he needed not just an apology but a show of faith in his individuality. A camping trip, just the two of us, away from the chaos, was something he could take pride in. So I took him one Saturday, packed the car with sleeping bags and junk food, and we left our technology behind, just the two of us, under the vast canopy of stars. I watched as Noah pitched the tent, his confidence growing little by little with each step he took, and I felt something shift in the air. The weight of guilt was still there but backed by hope too. As we sat around the campfire, with the crackling flames dancing in our eyes, I told him everything, how proud I was of him, how much his uniqueness meant to me, how I should have encouraged him to be himself rather than lash out in frustration. His grin lit up the night, warming the chill away like the flames before us, and in that magic moment, I saw a spark of resilience flicker in his soul. I realized something immensely powerful. By letting him feel just a bit of the weight of the world, he took the first step towards overcoming it. A few weeks later, things had transformed slightly. Noah laughed louder, started to engage with new friends from school, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief. It was as if my awful comments had forced a metamorphosis instead of breaking him, and as I watched him go through that new cycle of life, I knew I'd been wrong but that sometimes wrong turns can lead to unexpected growth. The barbecue wasn't the last. Family gatherings still echoed laughter just like that day did, but now I watched my son thrive instead of falter, and the cycle of hurt had turned into a cycle of healing, teaching him the resilience of the human spirit and that no matter what happens, coming back stronger is what truly matters. Amidst all that drama, amidst those blurted words and tearful evenings, there had emerged a tender understanding that formed deeper than any barrier, and while I may have blamed Noah, I realized it was just the gentle nudges of parenthood that pushed us both to be better versions of ourselves. In hauntingly beautiful ways, sometimes insensitivity can lead us to the love we really need. When my grandmother passed away, she left us with a trove of jewelry, each piece laden with memories and whispers of family history woven into their ornate designs, and it was decided at her funeral that her prized possessions would go to her favorite, my cousin Sarah, who had always been vocal about her longing for them. I was more of a quiet observer in our family dynamics, something of an underdog constantly overlooked, so when the time came to talk about the inheritance, I stood back, allowing the others to discuss Sarah's claims, her tears, as they painted a picture of the deserving child, the granddaughter her heart favored. But not long after, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface, a gnawing sensation that my grandmother would not have wanted to make that decision so neatly or so soon without considering the rest of us. I started looking at the jewelry the night after the funeral, each one glimmering under the soft light of the lamp, but it wasn't the sparkle that drew me in, it was the way they seemed to pulse with a life of their own, almost as if revealing stories only I could hear. The emerald pendant, my grandmother always said, held the spirit of protection, the silver bracelet twinkled with memories of laughter and mourning, and the pearl earrings, her most cherished, echoed the vows she took, binding family together. As the days passed, I sneaked out with the jewelry one evening to my grandmother's house, the winds howling against the glass like voices pleading, wearing a heavy weight of unease as I unlocked the door to her empty living room, the barren space feeling far too strange without her tender presence. I laid the items out on the table, compelled to remember each story, but as I did, the air turned thick, heavy with an electrifying tension that set my skin prickling. I whispered my grandmother's name, a desperate plea for wisdom, and suddenly I felt it, an icy breath against my neck, a presence so real that I spun around expecting to find someone, but there was only the whisper of moths tapping ineffectively against the windows. That night, sleep evaded me as I wrestled with visions of Sarah, her face twisted with disappointment should I fail to return the jewelry, yet my heart shuddered with the instinct that something wasn't right. Then came the nightmares. In them, my grandmother appeared, her ethereal face hovering above me, her lips chanted a warning I couldn't decipher, yet the urgency behind her eyes pierced through the fog of sleep. Each night, those dreams grew darker. I saw Sarah in the attic, rifling through boxes, her hands clawing at the memories I wanted to preserve. I felt a rush of anger, a need to step in, despite everyone else dismissing me as jealous or bitter, yet I was only following my grandmother's wishes. Days melted into each other, and I found myself ensnared in the tension of relatives crowded in my small living room, each eager to claim Their share, everyone casting furtive glances in my direction, waiting for me to hand over what my grandmother had apparently promised to Sarah. I held my ground, aware that Sarah's eyes glinted in the reminder of friendship, tangled with loss, hers for my grandmother, and mine for the identities we were expected to wield as family members. As the pressure mounted, so too did the whispers. Rumors spread through the family like wildfire, accusations of greed unfurling over dinner tables, bitterness painting a rift between us. I considered surrendering the jewelry just to appease the storm of hurt feelings, yet around the same time, the jewelry began haunting me in ways I could not explain, strange occurrences swirling within the confines of the house, the lights flickering, objects rearranging themselves in the darkness, and echoes of laughter that seemed to originate from the pieces themselves. I couldn't help but wonder, did my grandmother bestow her earthly treasures with the intention of continuing a cycle, or did she craft them with the precision to repel tormentors like Sarah? Then came the revelation one stormy night when I sat in silence, the rain beating against the windows like a relentless drum. That was when I discovered the hidden compartment in the emerald pendant, the chill of the metal pricking at my fingertips as I worked to open it, revealing an old photograph of my grandmother in a flowing dress and a note, its edges frayed, penned with her delicate script, warning to keep the jewelry close, the ones who covet them may have intentions that corrupt. The moment I clutched that slip of paper, a warmth flooded through me, threads of connection stretching back through generations. The intent warned me away from surrendering the legacy she left behind. The next day, I finally approached Sarah, the sunlight splintering through dark clouds, making the moment feel almost surreal. I placed my hands on the table, grounding myself as I looked into my cousin's eyes, shimmering with tears and expectancy, and I told her how our grandmother would never have wanted this kind of animosity and entitlement stemming from love. Those gems were mine, bound through blood and shared history. The room fell silent, the tension sharper than any blade. I could see the reflection of other relatives in Sarah's pupils flip-flopping between support and a need for dissension, but something snapped inside me, and a fierce voice broke through, claiming our shared bond that had long been overshadowed by greed. Time froze momentarily, and to my shock, Sarah's expression shifted. Betrayal twisted her features, but then I noticed the shadows behind her, creeping along the edges of the room, a darkness that felt familiar and foreboding. It dawned upon me that I was not the only one who had heard my grandmother's pleas. The air thickened with disquiet as it dawned on me. I wasn't just defending some jewels, I was shielding our bloodline. Clutching the pendant close to my heart, I vowed to keep the jewelry not as a mere possession but as a guardian of stories that could not be tainted by envy or desire. I realized now that sometimes protecting a legacy meant making hard choices, forcing your hand against those you love, becoming the villain in their eyes to uphold the dignity of those departed. As the shadows receded slowly, I felt it, a quiet resolve wrapping an iron grip around my heart, knowing I was not wrong for resisting Sarah's claim but rather, I was right to protect what was more sacred than envy, our family. In that moment, the chains of our ancestral stories tightened like a noose, both a blessing and a curse, binding me to a fate I would uphold, in memory of her, against all odds, even if it meant sealing the very fate of our family. I never thought Thanksgiving would be the day everything would unravel, but here we are, just a few days away from the holiday when my brother decided to bring his new girlfriend into the family fold. Now, Logan had always been a bit impulsive, jumping from one relationship to another like a child on a trampoline, but this new girl, Tara, was something else. Our family is tight-knit, built on love and respect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about her. It started a few weeks ago at a family barbecue. Tara showed up uninvited, slinking into our backyard in a low-cut dress and high heels, her laughter too loud and forced. I remember my wife, Sarah, greeting her with a warm smile, the kind that melts the heart, but Tara, with a dismissive wave, merely rolled her eyes, shooting back a caustic remark about how basic the whole event was. I felt the atmosphere freeze, Sarah's smile faltered, and the warmth of family quickly turned to awkwardness, the kind you feel in the pit of your stomach when someone's just been insulted in a room where everyone should feel safe. Despite the tension, I shrugged it off. Relationships take time, maybe she was just a little too much wine and not enough maturity. But then, the comments kept coming. It was like she had a vendetta against my wife, each word woven into a tapestry of disdain. At the next family gathering, she brought up how funny it was that I had the same job for 5 years, as if my dedication to our family's financial security was laughable, but, of course, Logan, ever the oblivious one, just laughed along. My heart raced as I watched Sarah's face contort with hurt. I approached Logan later and voiced my concerns, but he dismissed me, insisting I was being overprotective. It escalated from there, and I couldn't take it anymore. I made it clear, Tara wasn't welcome at our Thanksgiving dinner. This was a day for family, love, and gratitude, not taunts and jabs at the dinner table. When I broke the news to Logan, he went quiet, his face morphing into disbelief and anger, like I'd slapped him. "You can't just dictate who I can date," he exploded, red-faced and incensed. I stood my ground. "I'm not dictating anything, I'm protecting my family." Our conversation devolved into a fight, complete with accusations of me being controlling and unfair. It spiraled until we were both shouting, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, that I was pushing him away. But then he brought Sarah into it, saying that if she couldn't handle a little teasing, maybe I shouldn't have married her. That hit harder than any insult Tara had thrown, and I felt an icy rage boil inside me. Thanksgiving came, the air crisp and chilly, and I still buzzed with anger. Sarah was tentative around me, unsure of how to ease the tension brewing like a storm above our family eagle's nest, as she called it. I thought about all that Tara had put her through, how she had disrespected the very foundation of our lives together. The day of Thanksgiving dawned bright, but the shadow of the upcoming confrontation loomed large. I spent the day cooking, the scents of turkey and stuffing filling our home, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Logan, wondering if he'd take the high road or wash his hands of our family tradition. Then, the doorbell rang, and I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. There he stood, all confident bravado, with Tara clinging to his arm like a leech. I opened the door, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Hey, Logan. Happy Thanksgiving," I said, already regretting every bit of small talk that was about to ensue. "Thanks, man, good to see you," he replied, his voice leeching with tension as he glanced at my face for any sign of approval. Tara, however, was a different story. Rather than grace myself with a simple hello, she leaned in close to me and whispered, "You're really upset I'm here, aren't you, sweetie?" In a tone so saccharine it made my teeth ache. I could taste the bile rising in my throat as the words hung thick in the air. I forced a laugh, but inside, I was battling the monster of rage swarming my insides. I ushered them inside and busied myself with the preparations, Sarah already setting the table with an uncharacteristically somber expression. Tara breezed around the house, commenting on the decorations, how they looked cheap, as if she had any room to talk, and I was ready to snap. Dinner came, and we all settled down, tension thick enough to slice with a knife. Small talk morphed into a battlefield, and as Tara consumed her plate, every word dripped with thinly veiled mockery directed at my wife until Sarah excused herself and left the table. I caught a glimpse of her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, and something inside me snapped. I stood up so hard my chair toppled over. "Tara, if you can't show my wife respect in her own home, you don't deserve to be here and neither does Logan," I spat, all of my pent-up frustration exploding in a mixture of protective love and seething anger. The table fell silent, forks frozen in midair, as Logan shot out of his chair, flaring with indignation. "You're being unreasonable. She's my girlfriend," he screamed, the table shaking under the weight of his fury. But it was Tara that caught me off guard when she leaned back and said, honestly, "Your life sounds pathetic. I feel sorry for your wife." My heart dropped like lead, the air became thick with something heavy. Was it hatred or contempt? I took a breath, steadying myself. "You're right, Tara, I do feel sorry for you. You've managed to entangle yourself with a man who clearly doesn't see the damage you're doing." Logan looked stricken, staring between us, torn. That was when I reached my breaking point, turning to him and saying, "You deserve better than this and so does she. I'm not the bad guy here, you are. I'll choose family over a petty squabble with a woman who can't respect my wife." I suddenly felt hollow and exposed, a dark mantle of anger and shame wrapping around me. Logan shook his head in fury, and I saw a ripple of realization cross his face, the anger twisting into a profound confusion. Tara stood there, smugly, as if to say she had just won a twisted game of chess where she expected to claim the crown. That's when I kicked them out, a moment that felt both immensely satisfying and eviscerating at the same time. I slammed the door behind them, breathing heavily, my heart racing faster than it had in years as I faced the fallout. I turned to find Sarah framed in the kitchen doorway, her face a landscape of conflicting emotions, pride, sadness, and relief, all tangled into a sorrowful smile. The room felt different, lighter somehow, as we held each other's gaze, and in that moment, I knew we could withstand anything, while all I could think about was whether I had chosen rightly for my family. Maybe I wasn't in the wrong after all. The evening faded into laughter, warmth, and heads bowed in thanks, filled with new traditions where respect governed the values we all held dear. A thin veil hung over the doorway where resentment no longer dared cross. Last summer, I moved into a small neighborhood where everyone seemed friendly at first, but things took a bizarre turn after I had a confrontation with my neighbor, Mr. Thompson. It all started when I casually mentioned to him, while he was washing his yard gnomes, how I preferred parking in my designated spot because it was the only small power I had in the chaos of moving into a new place. He chuckled, waving his sponge like a wand, and assured me he understood my plight. But weeks later, I got the unmistakable vibe that he didn't. Each night after work, I'd come home to find his dented old pickup parked in my spot, encroaching on my territory like a predator marking its territory. Feeling bold one evening, I knocked on his door, my heart thumping violently, and explained my frustration. He grinned wider than any normal person could, his smile stretching across his face until it felt like it threatened to split him open. "It's just a spot," he said, a hint of something darker threading through his placid demeanor, like oil slicking through water. I had to sleep on it before responding because it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The following week, I returned home to find his truck occupying my space yet again, and with it, I felt a surge of familiar dread, though I couldn't quite place why. That night, a heavy storm washed over the neighborhood, accompanied by howling winds that rattled windows and sent branches skittering across the pavement. In the middle of my insomnia-fueled anxiety, I thought I heard someone tapping at my window. Peeking through the blinds, I was shocked to see Mr. Thompson standing there, drenched, his face smeared with rain and shadows, that same smile plastered on, more disturbing than ever. He called my name in this playful sing-song voice, but I swear, behind his eyes was something twisted, as if a different creature was behind them. Terrified, I yanked away from the window, hoping he'd disappear, praying for the dawn to come and that everything would just make sense again. The next morning, filled with anxiety-induced bravado, I marched back to his house to confront him fully. His wife, a ghostly figure I rarely saw, answered, her eyes glazed over as if she was looking through the world. I asked her if Mr. Thompson had come home last night, and she blinked at me, slowly, then in a flat voice said he was out working late at the greenhouse. I didn't even know he had one. Confused and feeling a sense of foreboding, I repeated the words in my head like a mantra as I took note of the strange plant-shaped shadows lurking at the edge of his yard. Days passed, and each evening he blocked my parking spot again until I snapped. I marched over, my blood hot and my hands trembling, and confronted him in front of his wife, who just stood there, slack-jawed. "You need to stop parking in my space," I shouted, the sunlight flickering through the leaves casting an eerie glow on us, and for once, Mr. Thompson's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard glare that cut deep as if he weighed the consequence of my existence. He leaned closer, the air around him growing thick, and that's when I noticed how strange he smelled, like fresh soil and something rotten, before muttering something I couldn't comprehend, words that slithered into an unnatural hiss. I backed away slowly, hurriedly retreating home, but the very next day, I found my car's tires slashed, neatly done with the precision of a surgeon. Fear crept through me as I watched that cursed pickup parked yet again in my designated spot later that night. Deciding I couldn't take it anymore, I filed a complaint with the HOA, but nothing came of it. Apparently, they were quite fond of Mr. Thompson and had no reason to believe my story. In an act of desperate folly, I turned to social media and connected with a local group about neighborhood issues, sharing my strange, escalating situation. Surprisingly, others chimed in with their strange experiences of him. People spoke of unsettling artworks made of nature's remnants that he gifted them, of their pets going missing. The fear blossomed into something all-consuming, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that Mr. Thompson was somehow connected to the missing pets, perhaps a sacrifice to the odd, twisted plants that apparently thrived in his mysterious greenhouse. Then, on a particularly tense night, I heard rustling outside my house, followed by soft whispering. Peering outside, my stomach dropped. There he was, Mr. Thompson, standing among the shadows with some others, figures I didn't recognize, as they circled something low to the ground. The dim light caught the glimmer of a long, slender object that glistened like a knife. Before I could catch my breath, they turned in unison, their expressions becoming warped, contorted mixtures of glee and malevolence, eyes shining like bleached bone, and I stumbled backward, panic spiking, the dark veil of night swallowing me whole. I resolved to end this once and for all. I waited until the next evening, finally gathering enough courage to sneak into his backyard. I needed proof. Just as I ducked beneath the overgrown vines, there it was, the greenhouse, more like a mausoleum, shrouded in darkness, where the air felt heavy with secrets. Peering through the glass, I could barely breathe. What I saw would haunt me forever. Inside lay not just plants but fragments of what looked unmistakably like the missing pets, their fur woven intricately amidst the foliage in a reverent show of grotesque artistry. Bottles of dark liquid lined the shelves, and I realized I had stumbled upon something far worse than mere vengeance over a parking spot. They had turned into something sinister, a cult dedicated to reclaiming life through bizarre rituals, and suddenly, my car didn't seem like an innocent dispute anymore. It was an offering of insidious attention. I slipped back home, heart pounding in rhythm to my blind terror, attempting to rationalize what I'd seen but knowing deep down there was a price to pay. Despite my fears, I couldn't let him continue getting away with it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had inadvertently become the centerpiece of their twisted offering, the outsider whose boundaries they would not respect. I dug deeper into local lore and found a chilling story of disappearances linked to a green thumb that preyed on the naive and unsuspecting, a sordid tale of nature reclaiming itself through blood and bone. By the end of that cursed week, I was determined to leave, sneaking out under the cover of dawn, but when I got to my car, I saw at least 5 gnarled, vine-like tendrils creeping from beneath, wrapping around my tires and digging into the earth-like roots. Looking up, I froze in place. There was Mr. Thompson, inches away, that same smile stretched across his face, wild approval dancing in his eyes. "It's just a spot," he whispered, voice smooth and filled with eager resonance. In that moment, I understood what I'd become, just another lost soul to nourish his insatiable craving for dominance over life, held captive with the realization that the only way to escape this otherworldly nightmare would be to surrender my life as a tribute, the very sacrifice that would grant him what he sought. And as he leaned closer, inviting me deeper into the darkness, I screamed internally, realizing I was trapped in a game with no escape, with no answers. Ida for asking him not to park in my spot? It turns out that in this twisted web of existence, sometimes the rules aren't just for parking spaces, they're about survival.
Ever since I got this job 3 months ago, my life has been a series of peculiar events culminating in a deep, gnawing dread that follows me everywhere, lurking like a shadow. It all started innocently enough. I was fresh out of college, desperate for stability, when I landed a position at a nondescript firm that promised the world but delivered little more than an endless cycle of monotony. Every day, without fail, I'd wake up before dawn, drive to the office while the streets were still cloaked in darkness, and park my car in the corner of the almost deserted lot. I'd trudge in, with my coffee in one hand and the weight of my exhaustion in the other, only to notice the same eerie silence enveloping the building. The flickering lights overhead felt like they were mocking me. They buzzed ominously, rendering the lifeless halls all the more unsettling. I was recruited under the pretenses of contributing to a project that, supposedly, mattered, a groundbreaking initiative that would revolutionize the industry. However, as the weeks rolled by, it became painfully clear that I wasn't meeting any lofty goals nor enhancing some grand vision. Instead, my tasks were laughably simple. Each day, I would plug a few numbers into an ancient spreadsheet, hit enter, and voila, I was essentially done. And yet, inexplicably, I still clocked in a full 8 hours every time, logging minutes that stretched into hours of staring blankly into my computer screen, trying to look busy while my mind spiraled into the abyss of creeping suspicion that something was horribly amiss. With time, I noticed odd things around the office that would make my gut twist tighter. Co-workers would appear lethargic, drained of any energy or ambition, and when I occasionally bumped into one of them in the kitchen, they would avert their eyes and mumble barely intelligible responses. It was as if they were trapped in a waking nightmare, slowly turning into automata, trudging through the motions with vacant expressions devoid of humanity. Whispers began to circulate about the office's odd policies, especially the unsettling rule that prohibited employees from leaving their desks during work hours, yet it seemed so incredibly absurd to be enforced. One particularly eerie morning, while sipping my coffee, I overheard a conversation between 2 starkly ashen-faced colleagues regarding the manager. They talked in hushed tones about how you could never look at him directly or question him, otherwise he might take a personal interest in you. My heart raced as curiosity clawed at my insides, pulling me closer to the truth that I desperately wanted to unravel. Naturally, that wasn't smart, so I figured it would be best to keep my head down and continue pretending I was part of this bizarre landscape, going through the motions like the others, but with an eye on the door, ready to delve deeper into the spiraling paranoia that had failed to let me go. One morning, after a particularly disorienting dream about the office practically collapsing around me, I arrived early again, driven by a newfound urgency to confront whatever dark force gripped my workplace. The lights hummed a new dissonant symphony, drowning out my thoughts, as I stepped into the lobby, where a deep chill clung to the air. To my horror, I was met by the manager, a tall, shadowy figure dressed sharply in a suit that seemed to consume the very light around him. I felt like a deer caught in headlights as his eyes pierced through me, cold blue orbs devoid of compassion or warmth. With a voice that rolled like thunder, he casually inquired if I was enjoying my work, but in the cadence of someone who didn't genuinely care. My heart pounded in my chest as he mentioned that my commitment had not gone unnoticed, a phrase so chillingly vague I felt my stomach lurch. Then he handed me a small, worn notebook, its pages crumpled and yellowing like forgotten memories, instructing me to keep track of everything. Confused but too intimidated to question, I accepted it, feeling the weight of dread settle firmly on my shoulders. What could I possibly need to track? Was it the minutes I spent doing next to nothing? Or was it a countdown of how long I could keep my head above water before the abyss consumed me? That night, unable to shake the feeling of unease, I opened the notebook, finding strange symbols and graphs, meticulous notes scrawled in a handwriting that didn't resemble mine at all. The more I delved into its pages, the more horrified I became. Numbers off the charts, scrambled letters, and something that looked distinctly like a list of names, my coworkers, their tasks, completion dates marked in dark ink. But what struck me hardest were the notes next to their names. Excessive breaks. Too many questions. Not one of us, I gasped as my eyes scanned to the end of the list where my own name appeared, meticulously inscribed with an ominous note, "Watch closely," and beneath it, a date less than a week away. I couldn't breathe as the realization hit me. Was I being monitored? Were they being punished? I was suddenly aware that each task I completed in the office wasn't solely a mundane exercise, it was a part of a dark practice, something I wasn't a part of, something insidious at its core. As dread wrapped its icy fingers around my throat, I knew I had to find a way out. Had to escape this twisted web before I too succumbed to whatever fate awaited me. But how do you escape a place where every move is scrutinized, every question met with cold silence? The next day, I resolved to leave early, just like I always did. I carefully crafted my path, conscious of the eyes I imagined upon me, the shadow of the manager lurking somewhere in the periphery. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you think you're getting away clean. As I gathered my things, anxiety brewing in my chest like a boiling pot, I realized that leaving the office wasn't going to be enough. It was already too late for that. I felt the familiar chill of the manager's presence before I saw him, standing at the entrance, arms crossed and with a hint of a sinister smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice smooth yet taut with tension. Unable to muster any coherent response, my heart raced as I turned on my heel, adrenaline kicking in like a defected soldier trying to escape battle. I bolted towards the elevator, fingers trembling as I pressed the button repeatedly, praying against all odds that it would come before he caught up to me. With every second, I could almost hear the hammering of my heart drowning out the silence, the dread of being snatched back into that abyss looming behind me. When the doors finally slid open, I rushed inside, breathing heavily as I stabbed at the button for the ground floor. But just as the doors began to close, I heard his voice slice through the air, a chilling command that sent a shiver down my spine. "You can't leave, you belong to us now." In that suspended moment, frozen in fear, the last shred of sanity clung to my being as I repressed my instinct to cry out, to pound at the walls, to make a break for it like my very life depended on it. But I felt it, an unseen force pushing down on me as the doors slid shut, trapping me in that metal coffin with my own worries. The elevator jolted downward, a disorienting ride that felt like being dragged into an abyss where time lost all meaning. Mortality weighed heavily in this vertical descent with the manager whispering promises through the thin steel between us, binding me to this grim fate. But even as the lights flickered ominously above me and fear threatened to coalesce into despair, I knew I couldn't let it win. I'd find a way to survive, light a spark even in the darkest of corners. It became clear that I had a choice to make: either I could succumb and let the cycle continue, or I could ignite the flame of rebellion, disregard the rules, those suffocating constraints that leashed my spirit, and break free from whatever grasp held me captive. I braced myself, heart hammering, ready to confront whatever lay beyond the elevator doors when they finally opened, knowing that I might either emerge victorious or fall victim to the shadows that awaited me. And in that moment, with determination surging through my veins, I vowed to fight against the darkness, surrendering to terror no longer.
I never thought a high school election could be the catalyst for so much chaos, but when I found myself losing the race for class president to Alex, a guy who was as popular as a sparkling social media influencer and twice as fake, something inside me snapped. Leading up to the election, I had poured my heart into my campaign, pouring countless hours into speeches and posters, all while trying to promote my vision of a more inclusive school, only to watch as Alex waltzed around, throwing lavish parties and posting perfectly staged selfies that made me feel like a ghost compared to his booming presence. On that fateful day, as the countdown to the announcement ticked down, I felt an undercurrent of dread snaking through my thoughts, an awareness that my passion for change stood no chance against shallow charm. When the principal finally declared Alex the winner, the sound of raucous applause and laughter felt like a dagger plunging into my chest, leaving me breathless with anger and humiliation. In a fit of rage, I stormed out of the auditorium, unable to contain my gnawing frustration, not just at losing but at the entire system that glorified mediocrity over genuine effort. I was tired of pretending it didn't matter. It did matter. Fueled by indignation, I hastily drafted a resignation letter on my phone, angrily posting it in our class group chat, bitterly declaring that there was no way someone like Alex could lead us. I thought my message might resonate, maybe even go viral around the school, but instead, it was met with a silence that felt heavier than the thundering applause I had just witnessed. The next day, however, my decision spiraled into something far more sinister. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, but not of support. Instead, my peers turned on me, the whispers and snickers echoing down hallways like a haunting wind, leaving me isolated. I had unleashed something I couldn't contain, a dark curiosity started spreading. Who were these people I once called friends, who pretended loyalty while eagerly stoking the coals of someone else's success? I began to notice strange things around me, my locker mysteriously jammed with an array of sticky notes, taunting me with phrases like just a loser or a standing ovation for Alex. Every morning before first period, there was something new, something that felt eerily tailored just for me, an intelligent push of humiliation that seemed to stalk my every step. That's when I saw the first video, a poorly lit, grainy clip of a group of students huddled together near the library, whispering and pointing at me, hatching conspiracies about my sour grapes and my unpopularity. It made my skin crawl, the realization that I was being hunted, and not for sport, but for fun, twisted their laughter into something monstrous. I tried talking to a teacher, but the weight of my accusations fell flat. They simply encouraged me to turn the other cheek and think positively. But how could I? Those whispers chose me as their entertainment. I knew I couldn't let this go. I began obsessively scrolling through social media, seeking recognition of my turmoil, wondering if others felt it too. I stumbled upon an obscure forum, a shadowy place where school dramas festered and spilled into the digital abyss, a chaotic collection of stories that made mine seem mundane. But buried in that cacophony was a community that thrived on misfortune, a hive intent on exposing what they deemed hidden truths. It was the perfect storm, and I couldn't look away. As weeks turned into months, I became a reluctant participant in this new narrative unfolding, a corner of cyberspace that amplified the vindictive laughter I felt daily. I learned that Alex wasn't just skating by on privilege, he had secrets of his own, and in that forum, I was pushed by an anonymous figure toward the darkest corners of gossip. I started posting about my experiences, disguised through an anonymous handle, weaving a narrative that cast me as the unyielding hero fighting against the corruption. I expected support, but received something unexpected, a raw, visceral acknowledgement of pain. Those who saw my plight echoed it back to me, but the moment I dared to mention Alex's shadowy connections, the laughter morphed into something darker, urging me to dig deeper. Days turned into a fever dream, losing track of what was real and what was a manufactured facade. So, when I finally decided to take action, concocting elaborate schemes to expose Alex, plotting to record him making lewd remarks hidden behind the bathrooms, my sense of moral clarity was long gone. I knew I had crossed a line, but it was intoxicating, like a drug feeding a mania that pulsated through every fiber of my being. Now, even in the dead of night, I would scroll through my phone, glued to what was once my biggest fear, the threat of being unknown, the scorn of being invisible, all black and white images blurring into the chaotic storm that consumed me. Then came the night that everything crashed. In the depths of a swirling digital web, Alex's world collided with mine, and secrets fell like raindrops during a storm. During a party, I confronted him, armed with evidence of his misdeeds but ended up cornered, outnumbered by his smug entourage. I was desperate, crying out about everything that had been done to me, about the lies and the clenched fists of the school's social hierarchy, but no one cared. They laughed at my anguish, drowning me in a cascade of ridiculing comments and shoves. The weight of humiliation twisted inside me, morphing into something more sinister, until I felt myself reach a breaking point. I don't know what happened next. Maybe adrenaline took over, or something darker that had been festering inside erupted like a volcano, but in that moment, I snapped. I lunged at Alex, screaming. The throng around us scattered, shocked, but it didn't matter. I felt unstoppable as I threw him against a wall, the sound of his head connecting with the metal locker echoing through the hallway, a warning clap to the mocking audience. As the chaos unfolded around me, blurred by my own rage, I thought about how everything had gotten so out of hand, how a simple school election had turned me from hopeful visionary to deranged antagonist in my own story. From that moment on, I realized I couldn't hide any more from the truth that had chased me simply because I had chosen to be vulnerable. There, in that moment of exposed honesty, I didn't care if it cost me everything. I was done being the side character in someone else's narrative.
Growing up in a small, predominantly white town, I always felt like an outsider, not because of my race. My dad was white and my mom was Puerto Rican, but because I lacked the adventurous backstory that so many of my classmates boasted about. If your family hails from somewhere exotic, it automatically grants you some status at school, and I craved that validation. So I began to weave elaborate tales of my heritage, claiming to be part mysterious immigrant, part ancient warrior, and the bits I conjured up dazzled my peers, who greeted my colorful stories with admiration and envy. My first tall tale involved claiming I was half Japanese, spinning tales about my supposed samurai ancestors who escaped the feudal wars to find peace and prosperity in America. As my friends eagerly devoured every word, I felt a rush of power, a thrill that overshadowed the gnawing guilt of my deceit. Sinister whispers danced in the back of my mind, warning me that eventually, I would get caught. Yet the deeper I dug into my fabrications, the more it felt like a game, albeit a dangerous one. I was invited to a cultural weekend at school, and panic clotted my gut as I realized I'd need to maintain my lies. That night, I plunged into hours of research, learning about Japanese traditions and even attempting to learn some phrases, dreaming of the moment I could regale everyone with a perfectly articulated story of my ancestry. When the weekend arrived, I showed up in a makeshift kimono I'd crafted from an old bedsheet, feeling like a fraud but riding high on their expectations, until it all spiraled out of control. One of my classmates, a boy named Ethan, had a knack for spotting inconsistencies, and halfway through my elaborate presentation, he asked me about my family's Japanese recipes. Like a deer caught in headlights, I floundered, desperately trying to remember the few dishes I had read about. Embarrassment washed over me, and in a moment of sheer panic, I blurted out, my grandma's secret recipe for curry. Everyone stood silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted into laughter. Instead of faltering, I leaned into it, assuming a goofy grin that seemed to endear me to them. Little did I know these moments of perceived genius would burrow deeper into my conscience. The facade continued. I claimed experiences I had never lived, friendships I had never forged, and adventures I had never embarked on, until they became part of my being, sinking beneath the skin and dictating a life I hadn't truly lived. As the years trickled by, the details blurred, bleeding into each other, and I felt a yawning chasm of loneliness open up inside of me as the need to exist in this fabricated identity intensified. What should have been the innocent ebb and flow of teenage existence became a minefield of extremes. Then came prom night, a long-awaited event I had eagerly anticipated but now felt bitterly unprepared for. I walked into that gym, convinced everyone could see right through me, that they would unravel the threads of lies woven into my persona. Yet, to my surprise, I was swept into the limelight, voted prom queen on the strength of my popularity, but just as the music swelled and I was lifted into the spotlight, Ethan appeared, standing at the periphery, gauging my every move with a scrutinizing gaze. He didn't take his eyes off me, and there was an unease in his demeanor that felt spine-chilling. The evening unfolded in highlights of laughter and dancing, but Ethan refused to let me forget his presence, a shadow looming over my splendor like a harbinger of doom. The moment came when he cornered me in a quiet back corridor, away from the jubilation, and leaned into me, nostrils flaring as he hissed, "You're a fraud. You've spent every waking moment lying to us, haven't you?" The world spun, the industry of my laughter drowned in his venomous accusation, the pop of the balloon I had inflated in my own mind bursting with such a finality that it knocked the wind out of me. I could see the disdain in his eyes as he drew back his hand as if to strike, but rather than fury, there was pity. The quiet of that hallway was deafening as he left me there, battered and exposed, and every friend I had ever forged an unsound bond with scattered back into the dance, unaware that the girl they adored was merely a reflection of their expectations, a hollow shell. I spent the summer hiding, grappling with the festering abomination of my lies until I decided to come clean back at school. When the new term started, I gathered my courage and faced them, but my confession fell flat. Rather than the validation I anticipated, I was met with cold indifference. They had moved on, their lives untouched by my turmoil, and in that moment, I understood I was eternally shackled to my fabrications, misplaced in an unkind world, condemned to exist as a ghost haunting my own history, too terrified to admit the truth, the simple fact that I would never belong nowhere, not even in my own skin. And in that realization, I finally understood that sometimes, the stories we tell, no matter how beautifully woven, can entrap us in a web of our own making, spiraling us into the darkness, never to escape.
For years, I prided myself on my ability to endure my friend Clara's so-called quirky behavior, the kind that often left me cringing, but I insisted to myself that everyone has their oddities and I should be accepting, even if her antics made me uncomfortable. It was Clara's signature thing to speak her thoughts aloud about everyone around us. It often felt more like a brutal commentary rather than quirky charm. Just last week at the cafe, she loudly mused about how the barista's skin seemed to glow in that weird artificial light and how she wouldn't trade her unique red-streaked hair for anything in the world, while the barista flinched from embarrassment. I silently cursed the day Clara just decided it was okay to play social commentator without any filter, but I almost let it slide until her antics escalated at a party for another friend's birthday. As the night went on, her quirkiness spiraled into something I could no longer ignore when she leaned over to a group of us and declared that she, frankly, believed that most people's opinions were below her own, and even professed how she thought the birthday girl's dress made her look like a scuffed-up potato. As everyone squirmed in disbelief while Clara cackled at her own boldness, clearly oblivious to the growing discomfort around us, it was then that I snapped. Maybe it was the booze or the mounting unease, but I felt the pressure in my chest and the fire rising in my throat before I realized I had shouted out, "Ida, for telling you that your quirky behavior is just plain rude?" Silence fell over the room like an anvil crashing into a pool of water, and by the stunned expressions on our friends' faces, I was hit with an overwhelming sense of dread because I didn't know what would happen next. Clara's eyes turned to slits, and I could see a bewildered rage starting to bubble just beneath the surface as she processed what I had hurled at her. A tense moment passed before she laughed, but it was a sharp, humorless sound, cutting through the thick air like a knife. She straightened up, and the moment that followed was a cutthroat silence where every single one of our friends veered their eyes between us, unwilling to pick sides, but I could almost feel the ground shifting, the subtle change in energy that warned me I had awakened something far worse than awkwardness. Her voice dripped with venom as she launched into a tirade about how tired she was of people pretending to be happy and how incapable they were of being real, claiming that I was the one who needed to wake up and actually embrace the authenticity she so proudly represented. She painted me as the villain in my own story, shoving my character into a corner while she proclaimed herself as the fearless truth-teller, and everything spiraled from there. The rest of the party echoed her sentiments, turning their backs on me, and suddenly I found myself standing alone in the living room, humiliated while Clara reveled in her newfound role as the underdog champion of anti-niceties, and for a second, I found myself weighing every moment I had put up with her over the years. As I retreated to the bathroom, my heart thrumming wildly in my chest, I wiped my clammy hands on my jeans and stared at my reflection, feeling both relieved and tormented by my own impulsive outburst. Was I wrong? Regrettably, I couldn't shake this overwhelming cloud of guilt, knowing I might have misplaced my aggression towards her flippancy. The atmosphere outside was thick and moldy, mirroring the darkness brewing in my chest, but when I emerged to rejoin the throng of partygoers, something shifted in the air that arguably felt more sinister. Clara was still entertaining our friends, but something in her demeanor had soured. The edges of her smiles were sharp, and the way she was speaking had morphed into something unsettling, her eyes glinting with an unsettling mirth, and as if she drew strength from my moment of weakness, the comments she tossed flared deeper, aiming at our friends with precision, laced with an underlying current of malice that felt palpable. I tried to shake off the odd sensation creeping up behind me, a whispered warning flooding my gut, but as I left the party, I caught sight of Clara through the window, her gaze burning into my back as if she were carving my silhouette into the darkening night. Days passed, and each attempt to explain my perspective was met with confusion and rebuttal from mutual friends. They didn't see her for what she was. Desperate, I pulled one of the friends aside and asked if they noticed how my words had sparked a shift in Clara's behavior. His face paled, and he confessed that he'd seen Clara trying to turn seemingly innocent jokes into cruel barbs aimed at anyone who questioned her, that none of us were truly safe anymore. It felt like I had torn open a wound, exposing something dark and festering beneath the surface, and I wished I could just go back, apologize, and rewind time to prevent my slip from turning Clara's soiree into a breeding ground for her sadistic quips masquerading as humor. At that moment, Clara confronted me one last time before our mutual friends, and with chilling clarity, she stared down the crowded bar with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and asked me if I'd like to play a little game, and when I refused, she merely laughed, menacing and melodious, as she proclaimed how friendships are merely social contracts that can easily be broken. Suddenly the laughter around us fell like dead leaves, air thick with an unspoken terror that formed a pact in the back of my mind. I started getting messages, odd and cryptic from unknown numbers in the days that followed, with pictures of me snapped through blurry camera lenses. The first couple felt harmless, eerie at worst, that stirred up good old paranoia unlike anything I had felt previously, but when one simply read, "We are all friends until the mind cracks," then what? I realized that this wasn't merely Clara being annoyed, it was personal, a form of psychological warfare. It culminated that Friday night when I walked alone from my car, feeling the audience of unseen eyes on the back of my neck, creeping up my spine until I reached my front door, yet I still felt the safety of my home was nothing more than an illusion when I heard Clara's familiar laugh from somewhere in the shadows. Alone in my room amidst the anxious shrill of my heart, I resolved to cut ties, rid myself of Clara and all that she encompassed. But just as the decision crumbled to form in my mind, another message pinged on my phone, this time an audio recording where I could hear Clara's voice gently whispering my name over and over again, and instead of a sense of relief, all I felt was dread. She knew where I lived. My heart raced, thoughts spiraled out of control as panic squeezed my chest tighter and the oppressive thunk of my pulse hammered in my ears. I had awakened something in her, transformed her into something dark and unrecognizable, and I realized, in that very moment, as I sat paralyzed and alone, a chilling truth sunk in. I had ignited a storm, and there was no turning back. The laughter would only grow louder. So tell me, was I wrong for attempting to call her out? Or did I unknowingly summon the very monster I attempted to escape? As the lights flickered overhead, a shadow danced along the wall, and I realized in horror that sometimes, the line between quirky and cruel is drawn in blood, and I was right in the center, and it wasn't over yet. I always thought high school drama was exaggerated in movies, but nothing could have prepared me for what unfurled one fateful Friday afternoon as I shoved my books into my backpack with trembling hands, my mind racing with anxiety over the upcoming prom. I had a casual friendship with Ethan, a guy who was smart and funny but had prolonged his geeky phase through all 4 years of school, and though he had a crush on me, I could never consider him as a prom partner, not with there being a big social hierarchy that I was desperately trying to navigate. It was already bad enough that Jenna and her clinging normie crew were constantly whispering about me, labeling me the loner who dared to choose her own path outside of their cliques. It was just supposed to be a night of fun and dancing, but I couldn't shake off the pressure of finding the perfect date to prove I belonged. As if the universe were mocking me, my phone buzzed with notifications, each one signaling a growing storm, Jenna's endless posts on social media revealing her preparation for the big night, and my heart sank as I saw her prime date, a popular guy, laugh and bewitch everyone with his charm. That morning, I had finally made it clear to Ethan that he wasn't my type. I had taken care to soften the blow but left him crushed nonetheless. Then came the worst part. His mother decided to confront me. She found me waiting at the school gates, her eyes sharp and probing, like those of a hawk who has spotted something amiss. "My son told me you've decided not to take him to prom," she said, her voice laced with aggression. I offered her a polite smile, trying to diffuse the rising tension, but she bulldozed right through it. "You need to look at your own choices," she insisted, drawing nearer, the scent of her cheap perfume wrapping tightly around me, like a noose. I could feel myself becoming dizzy, trapped in a suffocating spiral of anger and fear. The nerve of her, accusing me of ruining her son's prom when they hadn't even asked themselves the question that mattered: why would I choose someone who spent most of his time obsessing over comics and video games? "Listen," I managed to say, my voice steadier than my shaking hands, "I'd for telling you to look at your son before blaming me. He's sweet, but he deserves someone who cherishes him, not just someone looking for a pity date." Time felt suspended as silence enveloped us. I braced myself for the explosion, my heart hammering in my chest, but just as her mouth opened, I caught sight of Ethan watching from a distance, his expression unreadable, a mix of shock and sorrow. Something in me broke at that moment. My conscience screamed at the pile of unnecessary blame heaped upon me. But then the mother hissed, "Don't think for one moment that this is over. You will regret this." The ominous chill in her tone cut right through my initial bravado, leaving an unsettling knot in my stomach. I left school that day haunted by my words, wrestling with fear that I'd crossed an unseen line, and as promised, the worst followed. First it was small things, a flat tire on the way home, bizarre coincidences that felt like the universe was suddenly aligning against me. But at prom, things escalated viciously. Jenna and her gang surrounded me, each pitiful story swinging like a pendulum, as they mercilessly dissected my past choices in the light of social media turmoil, revealing the ugly underbelly of high school politics. I felt like a pariah, watching them tear down everything I thought I'd done right, with every smug remark layered with laughter. Just as it seemed I'd reached the lowest point of despair, the lights dimmed in the hall and the music thumped, drowning out Jenna's taunts momentarily. It felt almost cinematic as I moved towards the punch bowl, desperate for solace. But then, behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of a throat being cleared. I turned around to see Ethan, his mother lurking behind him, her eyes glinting in the dark like a predator ready to pounce. "You think this is over?" She snarled again, and before I could respond, I bolted towards the exit, adrenaline surging through my veins, only to find myself cornered in a dimly lit supply room where she followed, her intentions written clearly across her face. I desperately scanned for an escape route, but she was too quick, locking the door behind her, trapping me in this nightmare. "You think you can just turn him down and not expect consequences? You need to realize who you're dealing with," she said, her voice like ice. My heart raced. I tried to explain myself, but the words were lost amid the mounting terror. For a fleeting instant, Ethan appeared in the threshold, reaching for the handle, but his mother grasped my arm tightly, her grip unyielding, fixing me with a crazed expression, as if laced with a dark, hidden madness. "You're going to pay for breaking his heart. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you," she hissed it like a curse, and in that instant, an overwhelming wave of helplessness gripped me, my nights of dread crashing into unbearable terror. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket, a true signal from the outside world, and with a jolt I reached in to find a series of frantic messages from friends, some concerning their own safety at home. But I had less time than I thought. Ethan finally managed to force the door open, and just as he did, his mother released her hold on me, and I stumbled backward into a wall. She turned to him, her face now a canvas of rage and grief, and with one swift, disarming gesture, she transformed from the predator to the victim, screeching about betrayal and ungrateful girls. I stepped back, panic and disbelief dancing between us as Ethan stood there, frozen, jaws clenched, his eyes darting from me to his mother, that one moment a lifetime of silence. I could see the flicker of realization overwhelm his features, as he turned away from her, and in that tense, split second, the promise of something both terrifying and liberating dawned within me. "Ethan, it's okay," I blurted out. "There's more to you than any of this." I would never forget the look on his face as he eventually stepped back, the weight of his past shattering under the reality of who he could be. As his mother shrieked one last time, the moment spiraled until it burst into 1,000 fragments, but one thing was clear: I was done being their scapegoat, their pawn in a game I didn't choose to play. The horror of their vindictive pull fluttered away as I stepped into the light, the weight of that night turning into fuel igniting my resolve to find my own way, uncaged from the illusion of what prom should have been. Some choices felt like chains, but I realized some were roads that led right back to dignity. All it took was the courage to walk away. A few weeks later, as high school faded into something only an afterthought, I discovered Ethan had unfollowed his mother on social media, cutting her negative influence clean from his life. And while I never heard from his mother again, the memory of that encounter lingered, a reminder of the darkness that once threatened to engulf me, a specter now banished under the light of a new beginning.